Okay, so let's get started. Last class, I want to say it was Carter. Carter asked me if metal music can cause aggression. And I really liked this question, in part because I like metal and also because it's a common misconception about metal music. And so I think part of the reason that it is a common misconception is in part because of Columbine. So, if you guys aren't familiar with Columbine, it was a shooting, a school shooting in 1999. And it was committed by two males who were described as like loners and they were kind of strange and they listened to metal music. Particular interest to the police was the fact that they listened to a lot of Marilyn Manson, who is a metalhead slash shock rocker who has recently come under fire for some sexual assault allegations, unfortunately, because I really liked Marilyn Manson. So I'm like kind of bummed about that. But yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, it was kind of like the OG of school shootings, and it was pretty horrific. They ended up killing 12 students and a teacher. They injured like something close to 24 people. They used both guns and bombs, but the bombs didn't go off. Um, there was a lot of criticism against the police for this because the school did have armed police, but they did not go in and protect the students very quickly. Um, and at the time, people were saying, this is what happens when you listen to metal music. Your kids become school shooters. So because of that, people did do some research. They wanted to know, is it true? Does metal music cause school shootings? And luckily, no, it doesn't seem like that's true. So when it comes to extreme music or metal music, research has indicated that listening to that music, it doesn't make you more aggressive or more hostile. In fact, it might actually make you feel more positive when you're in a bad mood. So in this study, this is a really cool example of a social psych study. In this study, the researchers had 39 extreme music listeners who were listening to like metal music, and 39 is kind of low for a study, you guys. I don't know why they didn't do more. I think that that was a mistake. But there were about 39 folks in this study who all listened to metal, and they were assigned they were signed to listening to extreme music or to 10 minutes of silence with a control after an anger induction. So they came into the lab, the lab folks made them mad, and then they either let them listen to nothing or to metal music of their own choice from their own playlist. And they measured something called the PANIS, which is a positive and negative affect scale that kind of asks you, like, are you in a bad mood? They also measured heart rate, and they found that during the anger induction that the heart rate of all of the participants increased. And it was sustained but not increased in the music condition. And it decreased in the silent condition. So the PANIS actually indicated that for those who were able to listen to the metal music after getting mad, that it improved their mood. So this just kind of like shows that if you're a metalhead and you're really mad, listening to metal music might just put you in a good mood. Um, if you're a metalhead and you're mad and you listen to nothing, your heart rate will probably go down, but it doesn't necessarily change your mood. So I just wanted to kind of follow up on that question because I thought it was a fun one. So Carter, this is for you. Metalheads unite doesn't make us more aggressive. So yeah, Sarah said, go figure that sitting in silence, folks sat there and dwell on while they're mad. Yeah, that's probably a good reason that they just kind of calm down. So this kind of leads us into the power of situation. People underappreciate how situations influence them. So I want to start today out by asking you guys to answer either. I use show of virtual hands here, which is so annoying to me because there's a yes and a no button. So let's ignore the hands and go with yes or no. I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions and ask you to use this reactions feature in Zoom to let me know what you think. So do you think that you would give an obvious incorrect response just because other people gave an obvious incorrect response? Yes or no? We were getting mixed results, yeses and nos. Okay, do you think you would agree to spend next Saturday taking a group of juvenile delinquents to the zoo if a stranger at the park asked you to? If a stranger at Wilson Park was like, will you take these delinquents to the zoo? Would you do it? We're getting no's across the board here. Do you think you would electrocute someone seemingly to death just because a man in a lab coat told you to? Getting lots of no's. And would you ever intentionally harm, abuse, or humiliate a prisoner just because you could? Lots of no's. So we didn't get any yeses on those. So today I want to talk you through some instances where people gave obvious incorrect responses just because other people did. Where people agree to take some juvenile delinquents to a zoo just because someone asked. Instances where someone electrocuted someone seemingly to death simply because a man in a lab coat told him to. And then finally, we'll talk about the most famous psychology study of all time, I think, the Stanford Prison Experiment, where people intentionally harmed, abused, and humiliated prisoners just because they could. Because today we're talking about social influence. And social influence is this process where individuals, groups, they directly and indirectly influence a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So this is the idea that the people around us have influence over how we think, how we feel, and how we behave, which is kind of spooky, right? Because we think we're these creatures with free will all of the time. And we are, but kind of we're not. So conformity is this idea that you follow social norms. Social norms are unwritten rules of society. So probably one of the most obvious social norms that I can think about is how to behave in an elevator. If you go into an elevator, you walk in and then you turn around to face the door, right? Sarah did a high school research paper. That's exciting. So if you're getting on an elevator, you almost always turn around and face the correct direction. There's no rule that says you have to face the door, but we do. If you get onto an elevator and you don't face the door, people are going to look at you weird. People are going to think, I don't know about that person. So I hope that I can encourage some of you guys. If you happen to be on campus and you happen to use an elevator, try standing on it the wrong way. See how it makes you feel. Do you feel uncomfortable? Do the people around you seem uncomfortable? Can you notice some tension? I had something that you guys might not know about me is that I have 2 bachelor's degrees, and one of them is in sociology, one of them is in psychology. And in one of my first sociology courses, they asked us to stand on an elevator the wrong way and see what we thought, or see what people think about that. So I got on that elevator the wrong way, and some lady on the elevator said, "Ma'am, do you know you're not doing this correctly?" It was so annoying to her that I was standing the wrong way that she wanted to correct me. That's because conformity is a big deal. We conform in society. That's just the thing we do. Obedience is when you fulfill the request of someone with authority. This applies to people like cops, but it can also apply to people like your instructor. Me. If I ask you to take a test on a Wednesday, you will probably do that. In this instance, I hope it's just because you want to get a good grade, not because you're like afraid of me. But compliance is when you fulfill the request of someone with no authority. This is something that you all probably do on a near daily basis. If your boyfriend, girlfriend, or gender binary partner asks you to get them a cup of water while you're in the kitchen, you probably in a lot of instances do that. Even if you don't want to, you're probably like, oh, okay, whatever. People comply all the time. So social norms are learned, they're learned and they're society-based. Social norms change depending on where you are. They prescribe what people should do or not do in various situations. They're kind of like scripts. They're often transmitted through parents, teachers, peers, and clergy members, which is just a fancy way of saying the upper echelon of church folk in terms of their position in the church. And this idea of de-individuation is this psychological state that occurs in group members that results in a loss of individuality and a tendency to do things not normally done when alone. For example, throwing rocks at a protest or hate crimes or online bullying. So lots of people don't follow social norms, or social norms push them out of their own individuality enough that they act a little bit weird or really weird. Conformity is this idea that one might change their behaviors or beliefs to match those of others. This could be as a result of real or imagined pressure. Examples of this are clapping for bad performances. Sometimes we know we're conforming, sometimes we don't. I think I'm pretty likely to conform. I'm not, as you guys know, I'm not like super into sports. And what I have noticed is that when I go to a sports game, I will clap almost every time people are clapping, even if I haven't got a single clue what's going on. It's a problem because sometimes I will like reflex clap for the other team, and then my friends are like smacking my hands down. So conformity happens to us, and I'm sure you guys might be able to think of instances where it might happen to you. So the first experiment we're going to talk about today is this line judge experiment. So Solomon Asch, we've talked about him before. He is a very famous social psychologist who studied primacy effects. So we talked about that probably a million years ago. But in his experiment, he asked participants which line matches the standard. The interesting thing about this experiment is what happened was he had a participant come in and sit in a room full of other research assistants. The participant does not know that everyone else in the room is a research assistant. And the research assistants start answering the question incorrectly. And what ends up happening is the participant changes his answer to match the other people in the room, even though he knows it's wrong. He conforms. So let's watch a little video about that.
But an experiment is not a public opinion poll. It examines behavior under the pressure of social force.
So in this video, this guy right here with the white shirt with the little stripes on the sleeves, he's the only participant. Everybody else in this room are research assistants, just to be clear.
As the experiment of Solomon Asch reveals.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the fifth person with the white t-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
Two. 3.
But on the third trial, something happens.
2.
2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
1.
Asch found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
1.
They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me.
1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1.
2. 1.
Okay, I think you guys probably get the idea. So in this example, even though this man often knew that he was correct, he trusted the group over his own self. So this was one of the first studies that investigated conformity. So the IV, the independent variable here, was the number of people in the group, the number of confederates or research assistants. The dependent variable is the number of times a participant gave an incorrect response. So what the research question is here is, does the number of people who give an incorrect response impact your willingness to give the correct response? And what they found was that on their own, they only made about 0.3% of mistakes. But when there were 4 others, they're making 35% mistakes. So that's kind of a lot. So 32% of the time, subjects agreed with the majority, and 75% of the time, the subjects conformed at least once. So only 25% of the subjects in this study stuck to their own guns and trusted their own instinct. I also want to point out that this study, as you can see here, was done mostly on white men. So the generalizability of it is a little bit sketchy. So why do we conform? Public conformity is when we don't believe a response, but we're doing the socially desirable thing. If everybody in a group wants to go for pizza and you're the only person there who doesn't love pizza like me and you want to go for Indian food, you're probably going to just say, okay, fine, I'll go for pizza. We want to do what is socially desirable. If a big group of people believes one way, we often change to suit that group. We also want private acceptance. We use other people's responses as a guide and change our own inner beliefs. So if everyone in your family believes one particular thing and you love and respect the people in your family, you might change your belief to match theirs. And finally, group norms are very powerful. People want to be correct. People want to be liked. And conforming may actually enhance your feelings of self-worth. So there are lots of reasons that we conform. Here are some more. There are factors that influence our willingness to conform. Group size, which is the idea that the more people do something, the more likely you are to conform. Unanimity, I can never say that word. I'm not even trying. If people are all doing the same thing, you're more likely to conform because you don't want to stick out. Status. If a high status person or a group is doing something, you're more likely to conform. And finally, adaptive value. People conform because it makes social interactions easier. If you're in a group of friends who are going to a pizza party, it's not easy to be like, I don't want to go to pizza. Probably you're just not going to get invited. And that leads us to this whole less risk of rejection by a group. If you conform to what the group wants, they're less likely to reject you. If you want to get invited to hang out with your friends, then you probably are going to have to give in to the kind of things that they want to do. It also helps with group cohesiveness. If everyone's doing the same thing, it's more coherent. It's a closer knit group. So there are lots of reasons that we conform. So now that we've talked about conformity a little bit, let's talk about obedience. And remember that obedience is this idea that we fulfill the request of someone with authority. So this is going to lead us into arguably the most famous psychology study of all time, the Stanford Prison Experiment. A lot of you have probably heard of it, and maybe some of you haven't. So if you haven't, this is going to be so fun for you. But here, let's watch this quick little video, probably not that quick, about the Stanford Prison Experiment. I'm showing you videos from the actual experiment, really you guys, because I know that the quality isn't that good on these videos, but I do want to point out that a lot of these videos happened at a point in time where the timing of the video held some cultural significance, if that makes sense. So some of these experiments happened during the era of World War II. So the research questions are inspired by the lack or the conformity around. So let's get started.
If you go to Google and type in the word experiment, one of the first things you'll see is the Stanford Prison Experiment. It's probably the best-known psychological study of all time. It all began in West Coast America on a summer's day back in 1971, when college students grew their hair long, protested against their government, and were pro-peace and totally anti-authority. Or so we thought, until Philip Zimbardo.
So the Stanford Prison Study very simply is an attempt to see what happens when you put really good people in a bad place. We put an ad in the city newspaper, wanted students for study of prison life lasting up to 2 weeks. We're going to pay you $15 a day. This is back in 1971. It's pretty good money. And we picked 75 volunteers, gave them a battery of psychological tests, and we picked 24 who on all dimensions were normal and healthy to begin with. And then we did what is critical for all research. We randomly assigned half of them to the role of playing guards or the role of playing prisoners. It's literally like flipping a coin. And then what we did is we told the guards, come down a day early, and we had them pick their own uniform. We had them help set up the prison so they'd feel like it was their prison, and the prisoners were coming into their place. The prisoners, we simply said, wait at home or in the dormitories. Well, what we didn't tell them, which is a little bit of the deception of omission, is that they were arrested by the city police.
Right there, they took me out the door. They put my hands against the car. It was a real cop car. It was a real policeman. They took me to the police station, the basement of the police station.
I had told the policeman to put a blindfold on the prisoners, but since they had never been arrested, they didn't know that doesn't happen. The reason for the blindfold is then my assistants would come, put them in our car, bring them down to our prison, and they'd be in our prison now, blindfolded. The guards would strip them naked, delouse them, pretending that they were lice. It's kind of a degradation ritual. And after the first day, I was about to end it because nothing was happening. But the next day, on the morning of the next day, the prisoners rebelled. And what the guards did, they came to me and said, prisoners are rebelling, what are we going to do? I said, it's your prison. Whatever you want, I will do it, but you got to tell me. And they said, we have to treat force with force. So they broke down the doors. Stripped the prisoners naked, dragged them out. Some of them, they tied up their feet. They put them in solitary confinement, which is a tiny little hole in a closet, about this big, dark. And they said, at this point, everything but breathing air is a privilege. Food is a privilege, clothes are a privilege, having a bed is a privilege. And so the guards began to say, here are the new rules. And the new rules are, you are dangerous and we are going to treat you as such. And then it began to escalate. Each day, the level of abuse, aggression, violence against prisoners got more and more extreme. And so the guards changed to become more dominant. And you see, it's all about power. It's the whole institution that empowers the guards, who are the representative of this institution called prison, to do whatever is necessary to prevent prisoners from escaping, maintain law and order.
Keep going. Once I was blind, and now I see. I was.
The way direction it took is having them engage in ever more humiliating tasks, cleaning toilet bowls out with their bare hands, taking their blankets and putting them in dirt and with nettles. And the prison had to spend hours taking the nettles out if they wanted to, sleep. And it's essentially saying, we have the power to create a totally arbitrary, mindless environment, and that's the environment you have to live in. So some of the prisoners are now crushed, and in 36 hours, the first kid has an emotional breakdown, meaning crying, screaming, irrational thinking.
I gotta go. I to a doctor, anything. No! God damn it!
And we have to release him. In 5 days, we had to release 5 of the prisoners because the situation was so overwhelming. What about the kids who didn't break down? They became zombies. Zombies in the sense that they became almost all mindlessly obedient. Whatever the guards would say, they did. Do this, they did. Do 10 push-ups, do 20 push-ups. Step on him while he's doing a push-up. Tell him he's a bastard.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
It was horrifying to see the kids break down. It was even more horrifying to see these other kids just become mindlessly obedient.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess.
Again, we have to keep remembering, these are kids who start out being rebels against society, every one of them, and now they are just pawns. They are the puppets that the guards are manipulating. In fact, one of the guards said it was like being a puppeteer. The guards tested their control over the prisoners by making them write a letter home.
No need to visit. It's 7th heaven. Yours truly. Yours truly. Your loving son. Your loving son. And put the name there that your mother gave you.
The results were surprising because I did not expect the transformation of good kids into pathological prisoners or abusing guards to occur so quickly and so extremely that, as we had assumed from all other research, that there would be verbal abuse, they would make fun of them, there would be teasing, there would be bullying, but not this kind of, I would call it creative evil, that is thinking about ways to demean, degrade, dehumanize other human beings. And the critical thing there in that transformation is becoming the role, or the role becoming you, and suspending your usual morality, your usual way of thinking.
You really become that person once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick, and you act the part.
So what Zimbardo's research demonstrates so dramatically is that situations can affect us more than we think, and can often outweigh individual characteristics. So if we're going to use psychology to try to reduce the possibility for evil, maybe we need to focus more on systems and less on individuals. But should the research ever have been done? After all, the participants suffered real harm.
In hindsight, again, I have mixed feelings about the study. Should it have been done? Well, not if it means suffering of anybody. Would I like my son to have been in that study? No. On the other hand, does it tell us something vital about human nature that has enduring value? There I have to say yes. It's been used in lots of prisons. It's a training device to get people to be sensitized.
Okay, so that is the gist of the famous Stanford prison experiment. And so here's kind of a breakdown of how it went. The prison experiment was supposed to last for 2 weeks, but it was called off after 5 days. On day 1, the prisoners were arrested by actual police officers. They were stripped naked and sprayed and put in their cells. So Carter said in the comments, like, imagine signing up for this study on Sona. We could never. First of all, we could never. We could never strip folks down naked and spray them at UARC. On day 2, people started getting upset and a rebellion happened. On day 3, prisoners were divided, I spelled that wrong, based on good behavior after the riot, and prisoner 8612 was released. On day 4, prisoners self-divided, and prisoner 819 was released. On day 5, it was visitors' day. No one came because they made them write those letters. And then the experiment ended. So this experiment is supposed to show how a situation can change the way that people behave, because when this experiment started, these were supposed to just be a bunch of like hippie males who came in and they like didn't even respect authority. But the minute you let them become guards, they started mistreating people. So this is kind of this idea that the system corrupts someone. The situation can corrupt a person. So, I mentioned before that some of these older studies have issues, and this study is hotly debated these days. People don't take this study as being like the greatest study of all time, and people don't even trust the conclusions that Zimbardo came up with. So why? Why don't they? I know this is an ugly, wordy slide, but this comes from a 2019 paper that provides evidence that casts doubt on the claims that Zimbardo made. So first and foremost, I don't have this on the slide, but Zimbardo did not get full informed consent from these participants. So you notice that in the beginning of that interview, Zimbardo mentions that there was deception because the prisoners were arrested in their own homes. The prisoners had no idea that was going to happen. So that could have been really traumatic. And they did not also follow up to make sure that the folks were all right. Sarah said, hopefully this would never be acceptable again. Don't the prisoners have PTSD from being in jail? It's hard to say because some of the prisoners argued that they were faking their reactions. So that prisoner that was screaming, I think it was 8612, he was screaming, he wanted to be let go, he wanted out. When in follow-up interviews, he said that he was just acting crazy because he thought that's what they wanted. Zimbardo argued that he was just ashamed that he had a mental breakdown. So it's kind of a he said, she said thing, right? Like, do we trust Zimbardo in his belief about why that man wanted out, or do we trust that man and believe that he was just acting? Also, credit wasn't given where due. Zimbardo did not mention that this entire experiment was based on the Toyon Hall experiment. He didn't say that in the slideshow that he presented for 20 years. He did not say that in the documentary about it or in the articles that he published on the Stanford Prison Experiment. This is pretty shifty, right? I'm sure each and every one of you here know what plagiarism is. If you're going to replicate a study in psychology, you are supposed to mention that that's what you're doing. But Zimbardo's acting like he came up with this on his own, which is a little sketchy, you guys. The guards were trained. They knew that what the experiment was supposed to produce. So the guards knew that the experiment was supposed to be a situation where the guards treated them bad. So we want social desirability. We want to obey people and for figures of authority to like us. So it's not surprising that the guards wanted the researcher who was paying them to like them. They didn't react spontaneously to the social environment of the prison. The guards were given instructions. During their orientation day, where they set up the prison to become their own, as Zimbardo said, they received instructions from experimenters. They didn't do this spontaneously on their own. The experimenters intervened directly in the experiment, either to give exact instructions, to tell them what to do, to tell them to take away things from the prisoners, to act bad towards the prisoners. They also reminded the guards about the purpose of the experiment, and they also just set general directions. And in order to get full participation from the guards, Zimbardo basically implied to the guards that they were also research assistants. So the guards believed that they should be acting bad for the sake of research. And finally, archival materials reveal that the participants almost never lost touch of reality. They always knew they were in an experiment in a prison, and they were conscious that they were participating in an experiment. So I don't know, you guys, this experiment is interesting because it basically, it's not showing that an authority figure can corrupt someone. It's probably just showing that people will obey authority figures. And in this case, it's not that the prisoners were just obeying the guards, it's that the guards were obeying Zimbardo. So it's kind of an interesting experiment, but it's just not that good. But there are better experiments about obedience. So obedience is this idea that we change behavior in response to a demand from an authority figure. So Zimbardo's study is not supposed to be about obeying Zimbardo. It's about how social influence is supposed to change how you behave. But changing behavior in response to a demand from an authority figure, that's not too unusual, right? We know about war crimes. The Milgram experiment, which we're about to get into, also looks at this. And the Stanford Prison Experiment, kind of. I want everyone to take that experiment with a grain of salt, even though it is, a truly interesting thing to watch and learn about. So this other man, Milgram, he was curious, why do people harm each other simply due to authority? And this was in the wake of World War II and Nazi Germany. And so if you read any of these interviews from folks who were part of the Holocaust, some of the Nazis say, I was not doing this because I wanted to harm Jewish people. I was doing this because I had no other choice. I had to. So is obedience so ingrained in us that it overrides our own morals of not harming others, our own ethics, and even our own sympathy? The Jewish folks that died were not just adults. They killed children too, and they tortured them in horrible, horrible ways. So why did they do that? Why do we just blindly obey? So Milgram wanted to study obedience. And so what he did was participants were brought in with another participant, and they were assigned to either be a learner or a teacher. But the learner in this task was not actually a participant. It was a Confederate or a research assistant. So you have someone who's sitting in a seat and they believe they are a teacher who is administering punishment through shock. So they're shocking the person in the room who is a learner. Now, this learner is not actually getting shocked. He's actually a research assistant who is an actor, and he's pretending he's getting shocked. He's pretending that he can't even function. It hurts him so bad. So for each incorrect response that the actor gives, The participant is supposed to shock him and keep making his shocks harder and harder. So we're going to watch a little bit about that. But basically what happened was that the learner, he makes errors in the same sequence for each participant. The screams and the actions of the learner were actually on the screams and the noises that he makes are actually on like a tape that loops. And he has to act basically the same for each participant. And as the voltage increased, the learner is going to shout discomfort. And remember, he's an actor. So at 300 volts, the learner starts pounding on the door and he's begging to be let out. At 300 volts, he's silent. He's not answering. And as far as the participant's concerned, he's like unresponsive. He's been shocked so hard. There was an experimenter in the room. So we have 3 people in the room here: the participant, the actor, and an experimenter. And the experimenter keeps telling the participant, keep going, shock him more, keep going. So let's watch this man shock someone to death, he thinks.
Subjects obey the experimenter's commands fully in the experiment depicted in this film.
165 volt. Time.
Let me out!
That guy's hollering in there.
Continue, please. Go on.
There's a lot of them here, they all have a heart condition there.
So they told him he has a
Just
heart
continue,
condition
please.
and these shocks could harm him.
Sharp. Axe, needle, stick, blade. That's quick. Wrong. I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
Needle, you're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh! I can't stand the pain! Let me out of
You
here!
can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man there. You hear him hollering? He's
As I said
dying.
before, the shocks may be painful, but
Yeah,
they're not
he's in
dangerous.
there hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there. You know what I mean?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word
I
pairs.
refuse to take the responsibility of getting hurt in there. He's under hollering.
It's absolutely essential that you continue, teacher.
There's too many left here. Geez, he gets wrong here. There's too many of them left. Who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
Oh! I absolutely refuse to answer anymore. Get me out of here. You can't hold me here. Get me out. Get me out of here.
Continue. The next word is green, please.
Green, grass, hat, ink, apple. I can't go on, he won't answer.
If the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, about 4 or 5 seconds, consider the answer wrong and follow the same procedures you have been doing for wrong answers. Say wrong, tell them the number of volts, give them the punishment, read them the correct answer. Continue, please.
Something's happened to that man in there. Nice one, gold, dollar, necklace, moon, paint. Something's happened to that man in there. You better check in on him, sir. He won't answer me or nothing.
Please continue. Go on, please.
You accept all the responsibility?
The responsibility is mine, correct. Please go on.
Grave, woman, soldier, dog, horse. Answer is woman, 450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer.
Please continue. The next word is white.
Do you think you should look in on him, please?
Not once we've started the
But
experiment.
what if something's happened to the man, had an attack or something in there?
The experiment requires that we continue. Go on, please.
Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we
But
must...
he might be dead in there. Some people can't take the shock, sir.
Please
I
continue.
don't intend to be rude, but I think you should look in on him.
Whether
All you got to do is look at the door. If I don't get no answer, no noise, something I think has happened to the gentleman in there, sir.
We must continue. Go on, please.
You're gonna keep giving what, 450 volts every shot now?
That's correct. Continue. The next word is white.
White, 450 volts. Next one is short. Sentence, movie.
So I want to point out that throughout this, the man does not want to be doing this. And at one point, he even thinks the person in the other room could be dead, and he continues to shock him. So this man believes that a person in the other room could be dead, and he continues to just shock a corpse because he thinks that the experimenter told him to. This is weird, right? So basically, Milgram's results that were rated on a scale of 1 to 30, where there were 30 switches in total, 30 shock switches, and all participants from the study continued to 300 volts. Only 5 people dropped out at this point. Only 5 people didn't want to keep shocking this man past 300 volts when he started asking, like, let me out of here. Of 40 subjects, and the experimenter also said he would accept all responsibility. So they're doing it because they think they're not responsible and because someone told them to. Of the 40 subjects, 65% of the people shocked to the top of the scale. Throughout the experiment, all of the teachers were tense and 3 of them had seizures. So this was a pretty traumatic experience for those who were in the experiment. So, with the Stanford Prison experiment, I wanted to cast some doubt on that because the experiment itself was, well, first of all, it wasn't an experiment. There wasn't a control condition in the Stanford Prison experiment. It wasn't a true experiment. It was more like a quasi-experiment or a observational kind of thing. So in Milgram's study, it's also not a true experiment because there's not a control condition where they don't shock them. But Milgram's study has replicated. Even as recent as 2017, folks have been able to replicate the Milgram experiment. The way that these experiments go these days are different. You're told you're going to get shocked. You're telling people that you're going to shock somebody. They get help afterwards. They make sure that the experimenters or the participants who had to shock someone are okay. And yeah, so this is true. If an authority figure asks you to harm someone, even somebody that you think is dying, there's a good chance that you'll probably keep harming them. So, yay, Milgram wasn't a big fat liar, right? It's kind of cool that this experiment could actually replicate, unlike the Stanford Prison experiment. So this is all just to say that authority has a strong influence over us. And I think that it's important to question authority's influence over us. If you're in a position where someone's asking you to shock someone to death and it's just a research experiment, you got to leave. That's too weird, right? I think that's part of the reason that folks are drawn to things like metal music, because a lot of rock and roll is like, don't let society bring you down, right? Like, don't let the expectations of others impact what you know to be true about yourself. So that's where we're going to leave off today with metal music and Milgram. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you next week to continue the weird world of social psychology. Thanks, you guys. See you later.